Welcome back, everyone. This is the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell. We're coming to you from our broadcast center and studios in Niagara, Ontario, Canada. The X Zone is a place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. And we're heard Monday through Friday from 10 p.m. Eastern until 2 a.m. Eastern, right here on the X Zone Broadcast Network, Talkstar Radio Network, Mutual Broadcast Network, and Simul TV. Now, if you'd like to send me an email, xzone@xzoneradiotv.com. On all social media sites, X Zone Radio TV. For the programming that we have available for you 24/7, 365 on the X Zone Broadcast Network, visit www.xzbn.net. And for our programming on the X Zone TV channel on Simul TV, www.simultv.com. And in the search engine on the page, type in X Zone. My guest this hour, X Zone Nation, is Margaret Dempsey. And Margaret has been interested in spirituality since the age of 9. She is the author of Female Kundalini, which was published in 2008. It is her spiritual autobiography, and in 2013 she was gifted a book which was a spiritual autobiography of a realizer. It spoke to her heart and changed her life, and she has been a devotee of this realizer since 2013. Her website, consciousnessitself.org. And joining me now is Margaret Dempsey. And Margaret, welcome to the X Zone.
Thanks very much, Rob. I just want to correct that website, Consciousness Itself, is really the website of a publication of that realizer. So it's not my website, but it's a really good website. So yeah, but it's not mine.
All right, which one is yours?
Well, I don't have one now
at
the moment.
All right, so gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, so tell us a little bit more about yourself. Tell us about the realizer. What is a realizer? I've never heard this phrase before.
Someone who has realized why human beings suffer. You know, we all tend to suffer. I mean, I suffered. My journey started when I was 9, you know, because I had these really buck teeth, you know, these prominent front teeth, and I was teased mercilessly at school, you know, and I used to go home and I'd say to my mum, you know, I want these teeth, you know, gone, and she'd say, well, when you're 12, we'll give you braces. So I was at 9, you know, I mean, 12 was like eternity, you know, and so I realized that, you know, I couldn't do anything about it. It seemed like my parents couldn't do anything about it. I was a staunch Catholic. I was brought to Mass every Sunday, and I was told that this was God's house. You know, we were going to God's house. And so I thought, well, I'll start to pray to God, because this seems to be the only person. So my prayer was very simple. It was, dear God, take my teeth. And I don't know for how long that went on. But one day I was going to school on my own, and we lived in England at the time, in London. And in London at that time, the pavements are very uneven, or they were very uneven, you know. And so I was kind of skipping along, and I had my hands deep into the pockets of my coat, and I tripped on the pavement, and right there and then the 2 teeth came right out on the pavement. And it's hard to underestimate, you know, or over-underestimate the impact of that. You know, suddenly here was my prayer answered. Okay, it was answered very, very brutally, you could say. But it was answered, you know, those teeth were gone. And so that really did set me off on a path of really knowing that there was something that was greater than I was. And then... So, and also what it did then was it really made me look at Catholic religion in terms of, it was always like there's this God that rewards you if you're good and punishes you if you're bad. And that really didn't sit with my experience, you know, because I knew I wasn't a great little girl, and yet this prayer had been answered. So I kind of just started to look at things that were said to me in that light. And then I went to a Catholic boarding school when I was 13. And we had a priest there who had a kind of a nervous breakdown, and he thought that he was sent to say Mass for the boarders because it would have been more of a gentle break-in for him to go back into parish life. And so he came and he said one Mass. He only said one Mass, but it really changed me. He said that God wants spiritual fruit, not religious nuts. You can imagine how that went down in a Catholic boarding school with the nuns one side of us and the other boarders the other side. But something about that, something about the distinction between religious and spiritual really spoke to me. And I didn't know the difference, but I really came down on the side of spiritual. And in that moment, I made the decision that I was going to be spiritual. I had no idea what that was or anything. I was only 13. So
Right.
I had no idea what that was. But then it's funny, you think you're in charge of your life, but suddenly things started to happen. And then in 1988, after that, I kind of explored a little bit through the occult. I did tarot cards, I did chirology, which is the Chinese art of hand analysis. I did all of that kind of thing. And then the teacher that was teaching the chirology, the Chinese hand analysis, said to me one day, I'm going to be starting an introductory course on Buddhism. And I was a bit like, what's Buddhism? Because I was like, all I knew was Catholicism. And he said, well, come along and, see what you think. And that night, that concept of karma for the Buddhism and things like that really spoke to me. And I really saw that there was a level of responsibility that we have to have for our own lives. And that had nothing to do with this God creator thing. So I did Buddhism for almost 10 years. So that's kind of a spiritual process, and it's a process that's open to everyone. Not everyone will take it because it's not easy, in certain ways, but it really is very rewarding. And then so I did Buddhism until 1997, and then I kind of felt that actually there was more here. I didn't know what there was, because Buddhism is quite it's a very high practice, if you like, but I felt that there was more. So I went to India, traveling around India, and I did a meditation retreat, which was 10 days silent in Bodh Gaya, and that was really quite amazing because it was silent, and so you feel that you want to talk to everybody, and then when the silence is broken at the end, you find you can't, that the ability to talk has gone. So silence is very, very powerful. So this is a roundabout way leading up to your question as to what's a realizer.
Yeah.
And so then in India, I met a man which he just said to me that life would get better, and I didn't know what that meant. So I came back, and then in 1998, I had an experience where sort of energy came up from the base of my spine up through my body. Mm-hmm. I didn't know what that was, but there is a phenomena in Eastern mysticism called Kundalini.
Right.
Now, I didn't know about this, Rob. I never knew about this. When I was studying Buddhism, because it was Mahayana Buddhism, didn't really speak about energies in the body. If I'd been doing Tantra, or Vajrayana, or one of those Buddhist philosophies, I would have learned about this energy that is at the base of the spine. But I didn't know about it, so I experienced this. And it really is a life changer, in terms of shifting consciousness. And that's what the spiritual process is all about. It's shifting your consciousness. So anyway, I had that experience, and the first time you have a spiritual experience it's a time to be extremely vigilant, because you can get ideas that you're in some way, the concept of enlightenment. You've heard of it, haven't you?
Sure,
You've
definitely,
heard of
yeah.
enlightenment. Yeah. So you can have an experience, and it can be extremely powerful. And then it's a very quick transition to, there's something special about me, that kind of thing. And so that was kind of how Kundalini can operate, because it's quite a powerful energy. In the human body, there are three realms of experience. You've got the gross, which is just the bodily, the bodily functions and the bones and the respiratory. You've got the gross. But then you've got the subtle, realm of experience, where the realm of dreams come in.
All right, stand by, Margaret. You and I have to take our first break. Exonation Margaret Dempsey is our special guest this hour. And Margaret and I will be back on the other side of this break as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Niagara, Ontario, Canada. I'm Rob McConnell. This is the X Zone. Don't go away. Welcome back, everyone. Margaret Dempsey is my special guest this hour, and I have to ask you, what is a realizer?
It's somebody who's realized why human beings suffer. All realizers, like the Buddha said, people suffer. That's a fact of life. That suffering is a fact of life, and every realizer has a kind of theory about why. For the Buddha, it was because of desire. You suffer because you have desires. You want to be with people, and then there are certain things you want to do, and there's certain things you want to avoid, and
right.
That's the source of suffering.
Well, could it also be said that people are stupid?
Well, people are loyal to the wrong master. They're loyal to their minds and their thoughts. And that's what the source of suffering is the bondage to mind and thinking. That's what my realizer believes, and that's what I have experienced in my own life. That when you think about it, that it's not what happens to us; it's our interpretations, it's the thoughts we have about it, that make us suffer.
Is it possible?
To give you,
is it possible that since we don't have all the information that is necessary, at times we make mistakes?
Yes, I mean that is true.
Yeah.
But at the same time, instead of looking at the source of the suffering, what we tend to do is try and numb it by doing different things. People out there, conventional people do it through drink and drugs and cigarettes and things
right.
like that. And mystics do it through trying to escape from the world, going into transcendental realms, which isn't it either. As a human being, we have a huge gift, which is to really look at, instead of trying to numb it or get rid of the suffering, just really look at it. What's the source of it?
So what we have to do is face our demons.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Instead of medicating them, face them and just
Sure.
see that all it is that it's just the pain of suffering that's caused from contraction, from our divine state of consciousness. We are consciousness. That's what we are. But we don't get it. We identify with the body and the mind and the thinking and the thoughts, and that identification is what causes suffering. And a realizer is one who has realized the falseness of that identification, and has taken themselves and their body-mind through a process, through a yogic process, through changes in the body-mind that has resulted in that experiencing and that living as that state of consciousness. And that's what a realizer is.
All right. In the bio you sent us, and this is a quote, in 2013, I was gifted a book which was my spiritual autobiography of a realizer. It spoke to my heart and changed my life. I have been a devotee of this realizer since 2013. So who is this realizer that you're a devotee of?
This realizer he's called Adidas Samraj. He had a lot of names. People may have known him as Baba Free John or Darfree John. And the reason why this person spoke to me, and he's no longer in the body, he passed in 2008, is because all my life I had been doing spiritual techniques. I had been a Buddhist, I was doing those techniques, I was Kundalini yoga teacher, I was doing those techniques.
Right.
And none of them worked, they didn't work in terms of relieving me from the pain and suffering. And it was only when I read his autobiography where he said experiences or techniques aren't it. Techniques will not give you this lasting, abiding contentment and peace and happiness. That is what consciousness itself is. The only thing that will give that to you is a relationship, and it's a relationship to an adept realizer. It's a relationship to a realizer who not only has spoken about the process, but has actually gone through the entire process to be an avatar. And an avatar is someone who has actually gone through the whole process and then returns back.
Well, let me ask you, what's the difference between what you're talking about now and Catholicism?
Well, Catholicism says that there's this God, you know, that it kind of rewards you when you're good and punishes you when you're bad. And what Adida would say was Catholicism is sort of exoteric, right? It's an exoteric religion. It's about rituals. It's about ceremonies. It's about socialism. The path of the heart is an esoteric one. It's to do with yogic processes in the body, but it's to do also with the path of devotion, which is turning away from the egoic mind and being related.
But isn't that the same message that you get in Christianity?
Yes and no. I mean, yes, in the form that when people are Catholics, they're turning, if you like, they're turning to a God.
Right.
You know, they are surrendering to a God.
Well, is it possible that the people who turn to a God can be you turning to a realizer?
No, because in many cases when people turn to God, they want God to make their lives better. In some ways, they haven't taken responsibility.
But in order to make their lives better, the Bible teaches you that you have to do the work yourself.
Yes, that is what the Bible teaches, and that's the original Dharma. But unfortunately, the reality is that people don't practice it that way.
Well, I know a lot of spiritual people who practice different forms of spirituality, like you do, who don't follow the tenets of the spiritual philosophy that they're supposed to be following too. So what's the difference?
Well, all I can tell you is that from the age of 9, I've been on this path. You know, that's why I gave you a bit of my history. Right. You know, because I'm not this wide-eyed girl, woman who's just found this person and is now kind of, no. You know, I mean, this was a big ordeal for me to do. Because in my book, Female Kundalini, which I wrote because I felt that Kundalini was it. I felt that, when it first happened, I thought, this is it. You know, this is what every spiritual seeker wants, is this Kundalini energy. It's at the base of the spine. You know, there's books written about it and everything like that. And I thought, I've got this. It's changed, my conscience. Why do I still feel there's something missing? Why do I feel it's just not it? Why do I feel that?
Well, the Kundalini...
So in 2013, when this book came in, and this person said, no experience is it. That for me was just like my heart went, yeah. So, I can't, look, I'm not saying to every, spiritual journey is like your DNA, or your fingerprint. It's completely individual to everybody. Right. And I'm not saying that this is the way. I'm just giving this interview from a personal point of view in terms of my own journey from going from technique to relationship and the difference that's made. But in the West, there's such this fear of but it's an egoic fear. That's what people don't realize, is this, reluctance to, surrender, to turn away from the egoic mind to a realizer, to put that trust in that realizer.
How do you define an egoic mind?
That's a really good question. The ego is a construct that's put together in language, but it's very powerful, and it's what makes all our decisions for us. But it doesn't, unless you're aware of it, unless you've become, you understand how it operates. It just runs life. It runs life, and it runs it without people's awareness.
Well, I have a problem with that, because I don't think that I let... Well, I let you speak, so let me speak now. There are times when I can agree with you that certain people lead their lives following their egotistical mannerisms. However, on a day-to-day basis, I don't let my ego get in my way. I think of other people, the ripple effect of my decisions and what I do, think, and say, how it affects others. Now, if I was an egotistical person, I wouldn't give a damn about anybody else.
Yeah, no, this is egoity at a much deeper level. This is the egoity that doesn't want to have anything to do with the spiritual life. That's the egoic mind I'm talking about. And I know what I'm talking about because that night that I read the autobiography, my heart was just jumping for joy. It was like so happy that all of the questions I had that I'd never spoken to anybody about because they just seemed to be so, different, that they were all answered here. So I went to bed that night really happy. But the next morning, my mind started, oh no, you're an author of female Kundalini. You've really you've invested so much in this. Going this path is not the right thing for you to do. Look at what you wrote in your female Kundalini book, that you would never have a guru. That you wouldn't give your power away. Look at the loss of faith that you're going to have if you go down this route. That's the egoic mind that I'm talking about.
All right, you and I have to take a commercial break with the news at the bottom of the hour. Please stand by. Exo Nation, our guest this hour is Margaret Dempsey. And Margaret and I will be back on the other side of this break as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Niagara, Ontario, Canada. A couple of things, X Zone Nation. If you would like to read the new edition of the X Chronicles newspaper, it will be online this Thursday at www.xchroniclesnewspaper.com. Some of the articles that we have include exposing the F.A. Mitchell Hedges crystal skull hoax, as well as exposing the truth behind the Mandela effect. This is the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell. I'll be back with Margaret Dempsey on the other side of this news break. Don't go away. Exo Nation, Margaret Dempsey is our guest this hour. And Margaret, let me ask you this. You were telling us in the previous segment about you received this book, and as you're reading it, it answers all your questions, and you felt something that you hadn't felt before. Could this be equated to the same way a person who reads a passage or a part of the Bible that really touches them in a special way, and they too would have this same revelation in their lives? Yeah, I mean, it is. It's a conversion of a kind, absolutely. The difference is that the conversion, when you read something from a realizer, is that let me speak about the heart, not the mind. The heart recognized the truth of it, and that's the truth that the heart wants to follow. And in someone that has another realization, it could be, I don't know, but there's the possibility that could be like a glimpse, that could be a first spiritual experience, which I spoke about, which is where you need a lot of vigilance, so that the spiritual ego doesn't get in there. All right, because there's a lot of for me, that was how I knew. Rob, I've been a spiritual seeker or searcher, since the age of 9. So, I knew, I'd read everyone. I'd read Aurobindo, I'd read Osho, I'd read everything that you could find. The wonder was that I hadn't come across Adida and any of his. But what were you searching for? What were you searching for? Well, the first thing I was searching for was that power that took my teeth to say thank you. That was what my search was really about, because I was absolutely convinced, that something, very powerful was there. Right. So it became about
about that, really. You know, there wasn't any such. But in my doing all of these techniques, I noticed that my mind, you know, that there was still suffering there, that I was still anxious and nervous. And what happened when I read that book was the heart became quiet. I couldn't believe it. You know, there was no more searching. You know, I mean, I was teaching Kundalini yoga because I thought that was the complete top of spiritual experience, but the heart was still restless,
Really?
You know, and I was a bit like, you know, what is going on here? And then the minute that I read that autobiography, the heart calmed, and since then it's been calm and happy. And
All
it's
right,
at home.
can we say that when you or other people who follow the different paths of spiritual philosophies, when they have a Kundalini effect, can we equate that to a Christian who receives the Holy Spirit and the feeling that they get, the enlightenment, the joy?
Well, you see, that's the thing. That's what's different, because the Kundalini is very much a product of nervous system activity. You know, it's an energy that's at the base of the spine.
Yeah.
And there's lots of books written about it. You know, certain people say that if you do techniques that you can raise it, and people try and raise it, you know. But in 2013, I put on the first conference in the UK called Kundalini Matters, because I was worried about it, you know, because if you don't prepare properly, it can have not a great effect mentally, you know. So the difference with the Holy Spirit, and this is where the difference where a realizer gives their transmission, it's not that cosmic energy. It's something that comes from outside of you in, you know, like the Holy Spirit comes from outside in.
Well, what's the difference? Well,
it doesn't tends to go from the base of the spine up. One is cosmic energy, and the other one is divine energy, if that's what...
Well, to me, they're both the same.
Yes, but one is triggered by activity in the nervous system, because that is it's purification energy in the body to take the body through the yogic processes that's necessary to be able to realize that what my realizer said is that we are just consciousness.
All right, now hold on here. If I'm reading a book and the book, you know, puts me into a state where I believe I'm having a spiritual experience, that is a reaction that is triggered by my nerves. So why isn't that considered as a Kundalini experience? Because it doesn't emanate from the base of the spine?
Yeah, I had that experience of emanating from the base of the spine, and then in 2013, when I became a devotee, I was initiated into the third. You know, there's 4 congregations in the school, and I was initiated into the third congregation. And at that point in initiation, the energy that came in was not coming up from the base of my spine. It came right down into my whole body, and it filled me with this kind of love and bliss and contentment. And that's how I can tell the difference between the two energies.
So
energy, you do it yourself, you do it by creature effort, you do it by techniques, but by turning to a realizer and having that level of humility and surrender and ego forgetting, then you open yourself up to receive this other divine energy, which in the East is well known. It's called Shaktipat, which is not Kundalini.
Okay.
It's a different kind of energy. It's called Shaktipat.
All right. So would you say that an initiation into the different levels that you've gone through could be equated to a baptism?
Yeah.
Okay.
It could be equated to a baptism,
Right.
but the context for it is different. Your context is that you have, in some form taken a leap of faith, which I was ready to do after 30-odd years or 40-odd years of reading and stuff.
Right.
I was ready to do this because I saw the truth of it, and that's what I was ready to do. But everybody's path, like I said, it's like the fingerprint. Everybody's path is completely different. But the thing to do is not to ignore that heart urge to go for the sacred and mistake it and self-medicate by drugs and alcohol and cigarettes and things like that. But, these are very much, as you said in your front top of the show, it's a personal opinion. I'm not telling everyone to live their life. I'm just giving my journey.
Oh, sure.
And I'm just promoting. I'm just talking about. I'm trying to undo some of the damage that's been done in the West about not wanting to have a guru-devotee relationship.
Why did you change? You were starting to say promoting, and you caught yourself.
Yeah, I know. I am promoting. I am
Right.
promoting because the guru-devotee relationship has got such bad press, you know, and yet it's the only thing from my experience, my 40 years of experience of doing techniques.
Right.
They don't work. If you're interested in enlightenment, if you're really serious about it, and you really want to have that experience, that state of consciousness that's free from suffering, and that's full of love, bliss, contentment, if you're really serious about that, then not technique, but a relationship to a realizer is essential. If you're not, you know, and it's not something that everybody is interested in, like you said to me at the top of this interview, what's a realizer? So obviously, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I am sorry if I've made this wrong presumption, but spirituality or an interest in spirituality is not something that features very high for you. Would I be right for that?
No, you're very wrong.
Okay.
You're very wrong.
It's just what I gleaned from when you said to me, what's a realizer?
Well, because I've never heard of that before.
Have you heard of...
That doesn't mean I'm not spiritual, because I am a Christian, which means that I believe in the spirit of Christianity, which makes me a spiritualist.
Yeah. It comes down to, you know, the type of I suppose, realizers. You know, they would tend to be esoteric. You know, they tended to be focused on yogic processes in their own bodies. You know, like Osho and that. But they were different too, because they were dealing solely with techniques. As such, with Adidar, he's really clear. You know, he doesn't offer any techniques. Yes, there are certain practices, but they're not done to achieve anything. They're done as a response to the heart's attraction to him. You know, and so in that way, they're not done with any kind of effort or struggle. They're just done in response. So the whole path of Adidar, or Adidam, or the reality way of the heart, is the way of heart attraction to him. And you know, I can honestly say that since 2013, since becoming a devotee, my life has just been so different in terms of how it flows, how it just, how it comes together, and how my self-understanding and how my understanding of spirituality has just, you know, just deepened.
If spirituality is as real outside of religious philosophies, how come there are so many different types of spirituality, so many different types of philosophies? Think about that, because I've got to take my commercial break for the final segment of the show, so please stand by. Exonation, our guest this hour is Margaret Dempsey. And Margaret and I will be back on the other side of this break as we wrap up this hour here in the X Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Niagara, Ontario, Canada. I'd like to say hi to a very special listener and a good friend of mine, Joe Gurney, who was the chief engineer at 610 CKTB when I was there. Thanks to Joe and his many hours of patience with me when I was learning in the broadcast industry. Here we are today, 30 years later. Still in the X Zone. And now, the X Zone TV channel on Simul TV. Joe, if you're listening, my friend, thank you for all you've done, especially your friendship. Now there's a man who knows what having a heart is all about. We'll be back on the other side of this break. Don't go away. Welcome back. Margaret Dempsey is my guest of this hour. Margaret, okay, so help me to understand this. As a devotee,
Yeah.
the realizer would be like the head of the local chapter, or like a minister or a priest in a religious philosophy.
Well, yeah. What you asked me a really very good question just before the break.
Mm-hmm.
You asked me about the realizers. That each one has a different
Right.
kind of realization, and how could that be? And that was really good. And that was the one thing too I was always wondering about, because I had read so much of all of the the big ones like Baba Muktananda and Sri Aurobindo and Osho, and I'd read them all, Alice Bailey. I'd read everything, and I was a bit like, well, every one of them have a certain realization, but how can they all be so different? And that was the other thing that really convinced me of the truth of who Adidar was, in that he talked about the great path of return, and he talked about there being 7 stages that the ego goes through on its way back to God, if you like, in its kind of search. And the first 3 stages are really the physical, the emotional, and the mental stages. They're trying to gain some mastery and control over those stages.
Okay.
And then you have the 4th stage, which is the way of the heart, which is where you see the divine as something other than yourself. Consciousness is something other than yourself. That's the 4th stage. And then the 5th stage is kind of the stage of Kundalini, and mystical experiences and visions and things like that. That's the kind of 5th stage. So people who have experiences in the 5th stage of life would speak about and talk about and write about those realizations. So Baba Muktananda used to talk about the blue pearl that he saw, so that was kind of like a vision, and then you had the 6th stage, which is the transcendental, which is where the Buddhist stage kind of comes in. And so those stages, are all that was already available. Adidar says the 7th stage, which is that your consciousness right from the beginning, so you don't have to go through all those stages if you just turn be humble enough to follow the reality, 3 ways of Adidam, which is really radical devotion, right life practices, and perfect knowledge.
You said that there was negative press, and that you wanted to basically set the record straight. Now, what is that? What kind of negative press have you heard of?
Well, when a realizer has a realization, in many cases, most cases, there's a really overwhelming urge to share, what they've realized.
Right.
And so then they begin, because it's the heart's, it's a heart response to want to do that. That's why, in a way, I became a Kundalini yoga teacher, because it's what I had experienced and I wanted to share. So they set up, schools, and devotees become attracted. And then somewhere along the line, and I know because I was in one of these groups many, many years ago, and that's why in my book, Female Kundalini, I speak about it, and I speak about the pain it caused, and I speak about how I resolved.
Well, tell us about the negative press that you said that was experienced, and this is why you wanted to basically set the record straight.
Because the negative press is about, there is negative stress about Adidar out there.
Why?
And that's what I wanted to get straight, because, I never met Adidar in the body. I never, I can only speak about his ongoing transmission, which he promised, and that's why there is no successor in Adidar.
Okay. I want you to focus on this question. Why is there negative press?
Because of a misunderstanding of the way that the guru-devotee relationship works. I think that's the main reason. I think that, a realizer wants and desperately wants to be able to give what they've given to people. And because it's not always possible to do that. If you look at the number of realizers who've actually had devotees who became realizers, there aren't that many. But every realizer really wants people to be able to have
Okay,
that
so where does the
self-experience.
negativity come in from the press?
Well, I'm thinking of one particular journalist actually who's made it their life work to expose different realizer groups, and I just think that the whole principle of the devotee relationship is not understood.
Well, you know what? Being on the outside, this sounds a lot like a cult.
It is if you're worshipping, if you're devoted to the person as a person, but if you recognize their state of consciousness, that's what you become devoted to. You become devoted to wanting that state of consciousness. I never met Adidar in the body.
Okay.
I never met him when he was alive, so I've got no reason to be, devoted to his person. I'm attracted to his person, but I'm not devoted. What I'm devoted to is his state of consciousness, his freedom, his love, bliss, his contentment, his absolute, and the fact that I resonate with everything that he has gone through as something that I've gone through. So that's what I'm devoted to.
Okay.
I couldn't, I didn't know him in the body, so why would it be a cult for me?
All right, so answer me this. If you've never met him,
Yeah.
how do you know what he said is true? A lot of people write a lot of things in a lot of books that are strictly fiction. Or
How many people have had 40 years of experience in this path, and then they come across something?
I've spoken to quite a few over the years.
Yeah, well, that's I'm only talking about my own experience in this interview, and that's what the heart never lies.
That's true.
The heart does not lie. The mind can make up all kinds of things and thoughts, but the heart, and as I said, my heart is happy and at home, and I can't give you any more than that, and you ask me, how do I know that what he says is true?
How do you know?
I don't, but the heart does, and the evidence in my life and the relationships I have now and how happy I am now.
Well, there's a good question. How has being a realizer or being a devotee of a realizer changed your life on a day-to-day basis?
I'm happy. I know that might seem really trite.
No. Happiness is important in a person's life.
Yeah, I'm happy. I'm really able to, I know that this life, beautiful as it is, fantastic as it is not ultimately designed to fulfill. And so I know that, and my own experience of that has taught me that.
Okay.
And so when I have accepted that, and he calls that positive disillusion. When you actually do really see that this life isn't functioned to work out, then that's okay. You can let this life be as it is.
All right, because we're running very low on time right now. We have less than 2 minutes. I have to ask you, what, based on being a devotee of a realizer, what happens when you die? What happens when this physical body just gives up?
Well, I don't know because I haven't died, Rob. But I can only speculate. And what I feel is, as a devotee of a realizer, that yes, my body will go, the elements will go into the ground, but the consciousness, my consciousness that has committed itself to realize the consciousness that Adidar is, not the cultic figure, but the consciousness, his consciousness. That consciousness will carry me through to the next part of my journey, which is as his realizer, or as his devotee, because that's what he's promised. He's promised that although he's no longer here in the body, that his transmission, he is here and his transmission is here. And I can just have to, hand on heart, say that is so true.
Have you felt it?
Yes. As I said to you, when I became that third congregation devotee, the energy that came down from down through the head was different to the Kundalini energy that came up through the spine.
How many members are there in your congregation?
Well, not many. This is the unfortunate thing. We've only got less than 1,500 because of you know, as he said, it's a hard, but it's a happy school, you know, because everybody wants techniques. You know, people do yoga because it's a technique. People do meditation because it's technique. The idea of relationship is like, no, not going to do. And yet, that's paradoxically, that is where the real happiness. But it's counter-egoic. You know, the ego wants to do the techniques. The ego wants to, you know, do the things. The ego wants to get. But the relationship is kind of turning away from the ego, and this is why it's so difficult to really do. And he accepted that. He said, you know, the world is run by egoity. You know, until people wake up to the impact of the ego and the danger it's doing, not just individually.
All right, Margaret, we have to say so long for tonight because our time has just run short. And Exonation, our guest this hour has been Margaret Dempsey. Unfortunately, the young lady does not have a website I can point you to, but there you go. It's she does have a book, so I'm sure if you Google her name and look for autobiography of a realizer that you'll be able to find it. Wow, another hour has gone by, and I will be back on the other side of this break as the X Zone continues with yours truly, Rob McConnell, from our broadcast center and studios in Niagara, Ontario, Canada. Are you a believer or are you a skeptic? To me, it sounded like a cult. It's funny that she couldn't find spirituality in an established religious philosophy, but she found it just by reading a book. Sounds very familiar, doesn't it? We'll be back. Don't go away.